How's everybody doing this morning? So glad to be here at Montgomery. Let's give it up for the band, huh? Getting here early, making it happen. I am so excited about what this group of artists here at Montgomery have to look forward to with Jordan coming on. It's really exciting, and I'm just really proud of everything that's happening here. I tell you what, it is Super Bowl Sunday, everyone. It's a pick'em, so maybe this side Patriots, this side Seahawks, this side Seahawks. Are there any Patriot fans in the back? Sorry, sir, you're going to have to leave. Well, this year's big game actually holds a special place in my heart because all week, all the sports news, all the news, anything has been reporting live from the Super Bowl, my hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. And I am having all sorts of flashbacks. I'm seeing the desert landscape. I'm seeing the big mountains, the people not actually wearing coats. And they don't seem to be suffering from that at all. It's pretty impressive. It's a very big difference from this morning, isn't it? Kind of begs the question, why did I move here again? Why am I not living there? But one flashback that showed up as I was preparing this talk was actually my church background. I was raised Southern Fried Baptist at a big church in Phoenix, Arizona, and every Monday they would do this thing called Monday Visitation. Anyone from a church background familiar with a Monday Visitation? Yeah. If you didn't raise your hand, congratulations, you're a fortunate person. Because here's what would happen. They would gather up all the cards from the guests, anybody who was brand new, and filled something out on Sunday, and they would hand them out on Monday to their people, and I was one of those persons, even in high school. And then we would show up to your house unannounced on a Monday night. Right? And that sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? The goal, of course, was to show the guest the way and pray with them quickly on that Monday night in hopes that this surprise attack would lead to a dramatic conversion, right? That's what we were aiming for. Now, it's not exactly or really even close to what I would do now, ever, I promise. No one here is going to visit you on Monday unless you ask, okay? If you want us to show up, we will, but we're not doing it out of the blue. Talk about a questionable operation, right? And we are wrapping up our series, A Questionable Life. And we are all at different places in our spiritual journeys, right? It's a relationship that we have with God. It's constantly moving. It's constantly changing. We're always at different places. But I know that we all have this one thing in common. We want our lives to matter, and we want to make a difference. We want to live a life that makes people wonder, and not wonder, who are you and what are you doing at my house on Monday night? No. Today, we're talking about the kind of life where the people that you interact with actually wonder why you act the way that you do, because it's not what is expected. It's not what's easy. It's not what's typical. Chances are we know someone like this, someone who they go out of their way to do good for others. They live simply. They live incredibly generous, even through that simple life. The person who forgives endlessly and inspires others to do the same. These people live questionable lives. And Jesus lived that kind of life. How he lived was so interesting. People often asked, who are you really? And why do you do what you do? And see, people question everything from what he did to what he said to who he hung out with. And Jesus was at odds with the religious leaders of his time. See, in that day, the cultural norm or expectation was to be very religious, and you actually gained influence and clout if you were perceived to be really good at following the Old Testament law. And the Pharisees were the best of the best at keeping these laws. And so they took great effort to make sure that everyone knew that they were following the letter of the law. Now, just to be clear, there is absolutely nothing wrong with following Old Testament law. God expected it of his people. But the conflict came up between Jesus and the Pharisees because the Pharisees were twisting the law and they were trying to force people into a cycle of religiously and relentlessly living up to certain standards in order to earn God's grace and God's acceptance. See, in the book of Matthew, we read this incident where the Pharisees accused Jesus' closest followers of not living up to the cultural norms. And while Jesus could not care less about cultural norms or religious piety, he took them to task in that moment because he was actually interested in revealing God's heart, the intent behind God's actual commands. And so things heat up pretty quickly between Jesus and the Pharisees. Now, I'm going to read this story. I'm going to read it actually from the Message translation. And I'm a fan of the Message translation because it makes me feel like what we're reading is kind of a screenplay. So if you can kind of imagine, this kind of movie script, okay, this is how this is going to kind of come out as we're reading this story together between Jesus and the Pharisees. Okay, the Pharisees and the religion scholars came to Jesus all the way from Jerusalem, and they were criticizing, "Why do your disciples play fast and loose with the rules?" But Jesus put it right back on them. "Why do you use your rules to play fast and loose with God's commands?" And that, my friends, is a Jesus burn. All right? He totally burned them. Right? He goes right after these so-called religious leaders. And then he goes on and he quotes from the prophet Isaiah and he says, "See, these people make a big show of saying the right thing, but their heart isn't in it. I mean, they act like they're worshiping me, but they don't mean it. They just use me as a cover for teaching whatever suits their fancy." See, the one thing Jesus couldn't stand more than anything else were fakes, frauds, people who claimed to be followers of the one true God, but were really just interested in keeping step with the religious culture and protecting their own reputations. So you will never find Jesus taking someone to task for wrongdoing when they come to him with a humble heart, when they're seeking forgiveness and a chance to start over. But the prideful, the arrogant, the so-called religious elite, he had no time for their games. Okay, now Jesus continues, and he's painting this rather graphic image, so just stick with me here. "Don't you know that anything that is swallowed works its way through the intestines and is finally defecated? But what comes out of the mouth gets started in the heart. It's from the heart that we vomit up evil arguments, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lies, and cussing. That's what pollutes. Eating or not eating certain foods, washing or not washing your hands, that's neither here nor there." All right, so what is Jesus getting at with all this imagery of stuff entering our body and passing through, as opposed to the stuff that originates in the heart and flows out? And what does that have to do with living a questionable life? Well, first of all, you can't fake it. You cannot fake your way into living a questionable life. See, Jesus wanted nothing to do with pretenders. He loved to spend time with imperfect people who knew that they were imperfect. Tax collectors, prostitutes, people who did not have their act together, but wanted to figure out a way to get closer to him. See, living a questionable life is not about pretending to be someone that you're not and living up to some kind of behavioral expectation. Second thing, what matters is the heart. Jesus says that what comes out of the mouth gets started in the heart. Then he mentions all sorts of bad stuff, right? Arguments, adultery, thefts, lies, stuff we see on the outside that actually starts in the inside, starts in the heart. And he goes on to say, hey, look, you can obey all the rules you want. You can strive to do all sorts of good, but if your heart isn't right, it really means nothing. So, last week of the series, if you really want to live a questionable life, it's got to start in the heart. Years ago, a Christian psychiatrist and a theologian, they got together and they noticed this pattern in Jesus' life. And that's going to be kind of the base of this talk today, is kind of illustrating and showing and teaching this pattern. And the pattern had to do with grace, right? We sang about it earlier, stirred by grace. Grace always seemed to flow into Jesus, and then that grace flowed out of him to others. And I think this pattern had a lot to do with how Jesus lived a questionable life. And not understanding this pattern, I think, trips us up when we're trying to figure out how to lead a questionable life. How do I figure this thing out? And Jesus' actions were always consistent with his convictions. And Lake and Brunner called this pattern the cycle of grace. Okay, now here's what the cycle looked like, okay? So we've got a little drawing here, all right? Now the first move in the cycle of grace is acceptance, all right? Now, Jesus' first act, his first public act of ministry was to get baptized by John the Baptist, right? And when he comes out of the water, the Father spoke to him from heaven and says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." It's the first thing that happens. You're my son. That's who you are. I love you. That's how I feel about you. That is your identity. That is your value. That is your worth. This is what he says to Jesus before any miracles, before any healings, before any conversations with sinners. No achievement required, just acceptance. That's the beginning of the cycle of grace. Okay, John Ortberg talks about Jesus this way. He says, the identity and acceptance of Jesus comes before achievement and work. Identity and acceptance came before achievement and ministry. In other words, achievement is not done to demonstrate identity. See, the religious leaders of Jesus' day told people, here are all the behaviors that you have to do in order to be accepted. But Jesus didn't operate that way. See, acceptance started in his heart. There is nothing we can do to earn this. There is nothing that can steal acceptance away. Acceptance isn't based on our behavior. It's based on God's unconditional love for us. Let's think about it this way. Think about a newborn baby, all right? Newborn baby. Most people, they love little babies, right? What's not to love about a little baby? Cute, I guess. I mean, there are few things that we celebrate more than when a baby is born, right? And Facebook and Instagram prove that every day. Every year after that, we continue to celebrate that day. But let's face it, what did the baby do that day? Right? I know that dad didn't do much that day, but seriously, what did the baby do that day? Right? They cried. They cried like a little baby. The truth is, I mean, on that day, there is nothing more helpless, weaker, slower, dumber, uncoordinated, or more incompetent than a newborn baby. All right, now I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but, the snow's protected me a little bit. But they're not even that cute in the first place, right? Have you seen those cone babies that come out? That right? It's not good. I mean, my babies were gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. All three of them. No exceptions. Not so sure about any of yours. Even so, even with that, there is absolutely nothing more treasured and more accepted in that moment than a newborn baby. That baby is loved from the moment it's born. We celebrate that day simply because that baby exists. And every human being, from the moment they are born, has worth, and we call that grace. See, you and I are loved. We're accepted. If you don't hear anything else today, I want you to hear that you are loved. And living a questionable life starts right there, right here in the heart, with acceptance. Okay, now the next move in the cycle of grace is called sustenance, right? Sustaining grace. We get acceptance. We've received that acceptance, but now we need to sustain that grace. And see, what we see, this is pattern in Jesus' life. Not only did he understand that God accepted him, okay, but he also chose to live in that acceptance every day. And he had practices that he engaged in to help him experience God's grace and replenish his soul, right? Sustain his soul. He would pray. He would connect in a close circle of friends. He engaged in worship with others. He knew the scriptures, right? He was able to quote them. He would go off on long walks by himself. He experienced solitude. He would experience God in nature. These are the practices that would sustain him. And I think sometimes we see these practices as behaviors that we're supposed to do to prove that we're spiritual, right? And that's what the Pharisees were doing. They didn't engage in religious practices and behaviors to experience God's grace. They did them to impress others, to prove themselves worthy to God. And how many of us have gotten caught in this trap of trying to do these spiritual things to prove something to someone else, maybe to ourselves, maybe to God. And it's exhausting, isn't it? And that's just not how Jesus lived. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anybody. He was using these sustaining practices to live in his Father's grace and to replenish his soul. So, when Jesus was baptized, the voice of God said to him, "You are my Son, right, in whom I'm well pleased." Right after that, Jesus is led into the desert where the evil one tempts him, right? And Jesus is saying, and he's saying to Jesus, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones, right, to bread, right? If you are, then do this. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, right? And the angels will catch you. But see, the enemy right there is challenging Jesus and saying, hey, look, don't trust the voice of God saying that you're accepted. Don't trust grace. You have to prove it, Jesus. I want you to prove it. And what did he do? He responded with the spiritual practices every single time with Scripture. But do you have those times where you begin to grasp and understand God's love and grace, and then you have those moments dashed by feelings of insecurity and doubt, where you begin again to think that you have to prove yourself to God? I know I do. Every time I screw up, I think to myself, seriously? Seriously, I got to work my way back up to this? It's hard to accept grace, right? Jesus sustained himself in God's grace. He responds to the evil one by letting God speak to him to squelch the lies that swirled around him. And think about it. If Jesus needed these practices to sustain him, how much more do we need them? So we start with acceptance. We move on to sustenance. The next move in the cycle of grace is significance. All right? Now, I said significance. It's written upside down, but you understand we're going in a circle, right? Okay, so let's just let's not worry about that. Right? We can see that it says significance. If you need to turn your head this way, you can. You have my permission. I believe this significance thing, this is all about the idea that deep down, we really do want to live a questionable life. It's what we talked about at the very beginning, right? But as God's grace flows through us, we have practices that sustain that grace, and then we begin to let that grace flow out of us to others. And we see this in Jesus' life. Jesus knew who he was. His identity was grounded in the love and the grace of his Father. But he also knew that his identity had significance. He knew who he was because there were purposes for him to fulfill. And so he made statements like, I am the way, right? To show you how to find your way back to God. I am the vine to sustain you and empower you with life. I am the good shepherd to watch and care for you. See, grounded in the knowledge of who he was, acceptance, sustained by the grace of God, he found significance by pouring grace into the lives of others. It's a selfless significance. In the same way, we are called to make a difference, to bring God's grace to the people and places we come across every day. You can do this every day. My wife, Christy, is a professor of theater at Columbia College in downtown Chicago, and she loves her job, and her job there is to teach acting and movement to young professionals, collegiates who want to be professional actors. But her true role, the place where she receives this significance as she is giving it to others, is to encourage and love those students who are there trying to find themselves, trying to find their way in a post-Christian world. And in many cases, they are in desperate need of help and support. That's her role. My friend Eddie is a successful businessman, and he is great at all things business, travels all around the world. But his real role is to be a radically generous giver. He gives money, he opens up his home, he sets aside all sorts of time to connect with others, all because he wants to help people find their way back to God. Every one of us, was made for significance. And it's a selfless significance. It goes out. It goes out to others. That's what living a questionable life is all about. Now, the final move in the cycle of grace is achievement. All right? So we've finished this cycle with achievement coming up around the corner, and this is action. Right? This is your life producing something. Jesus did a lot of this. He taught, he recruited, he healed, he challenged, he cast vision. And to say that the world is different because of it would be a monumental understatement. Jesus achieved more than any other human being, but he did it from grace because he knew it had to start in the heart. And because it started there, it filled him up. Right? Remember what we talked about with sustenance? He once said, "My food is to do the will of my Father." Achieving God's plan for his life in this way, it literally filled him up. That's the cycle of grace. Okay, but the religious leaders in Jesus' day, and I think we can fall into this trap too, certainly in today's time and place, we follow a different cycle from time to time, don't we? And you might call it a cycle of works, because it's not an inside-out strategy, it's more of an outside-in strategy. It doesn't start from the heart, it starts out of here. And here's the thing with the cycle of works. It's the same exact 4 steps as the cycle of grace, but what we do is we go in the opposite direction, right? We achieve to do stuff, right? Usually good stuff. It's religious stuff. I shoveled the snow, right? I shoveled the snow this morning at church. It was good stuff, but we start there. That's the problem. We start with achievement, and we do that to show ourselves and others that we are significant. Right? We want to let that achievement prove that we are significant. And we hope that that feeling of significance sustains us through the difficult times. Right? So I got to store up, I got to achieve, and I got to get that significance going because hard times are coming. And when those hard times come, I got to use that storage of feeling like I have achieved something to help me get through it. Because ultimately, all of that is a desperate longing for acceptance. That's what we want. But we go for it by starting with achievement. Another name of this cycle could be the cycle of religion, or the cycle of Wall Street, or the cycle of the Board of Trade, or Silicon Valley, or Hollywood, or the cycle of every sports field across America. Right? In those places, achievement is the highest goal. And we'll sacrifice anything and everything to make it. Because, let's face it, at the end of it all, we would all love to be able to say after we won the Super Bowl, "Hey, I just won the Super Bowl, now I'm going to Disneyland." Right? Or maybe you say nothing. Maybe you repeat the same phrase over and over and over and over again. Either way, God is calling us to a questionable and a countercultural way of life, and it rejects this cycle of works. And you see how Jesus' life just screamed back to the religious leaders of the day, it is not the outside that matters. Don't start with achievement. If the inside is right, the outside will take care of itself. It's got to start in the heart. My good friends Patrick and Nancy O'Connell, they know this well, and I wanted to share with you all their story.
My name is Patrick O'Connell. This is my wife, Nancy. We've been married 22 years. We have 3 kids, Bailey, Declan, and Cormac. We met when we were 16 in a punk rock mosh pit, and we've really been together ever since. We started dating literally that night. There was no real spiritual influence in my life.
I did not really have a relationship with God at the time when we first got married.
And so after I got out of the Army, a friend of mine got me a job interview at a very prestigious money management firm. Had a little bit of background in it, so I took the job because we had a daughter at the time. And I was soon pursuing the corporate dream of what's the next title, what's the next raise, what's the next milestone that I can achieve in the corporate world. But if I'm honest, I was a cruddy dad, absent in my marriage in a lot of ways. I know I wasn't living up to the person I knew I could be. This is really what my life's going to be about, the next promotion, the next pay bump. Is that enough for me? And I think I became really honest with myself, and I realized it wasn't.
We moved into a neighborhood in Plainfield and met some neighbors. One of them who attended just kept asking and asking me to come to church with her, and I just wanted her to stop. So I actually went with her one Sunday, and the video was on forgiveness. And I had had some issues with some family members that I could not forgive. I could feel the weight being lifted off of my shoulders. It was a pretty amazing experience for me.
I began to see the way she treated me was different, and she had more grace and patience for me. And I could, in hindsight, I see now that she was beginning to evolve spiritually and grow spiritually, and I wasn't.
Patrick was in a dark place, I think, the year before he actually came to community. So that was scary for me because I knew that he was struggling.
The best way I can describe it is I came into a season where I was open. I actually started reading the Gospels and moving through those and getting more familiar with who Jesus was and what he actually said. I knew she had found something, and I trusted her enough and had enough faith and confidence in what she was going through to know that there was something legitimate here. For whatever reason, I was ready at that point in my life to follow that Jesus, and that's the one I've been following ever since.
I remember being at a celebration service where they were sending out a church planter to plant a church in Colorado, and that some of the people that were there during the services would quit their jobs and up and leave and help plant this church. And I thought, who would do that? That's crazy. That's a crazy idea. Who would do that? Well, we would. A few years later, Patrick left his business, and we sold our house in Plainfield and moved to Kansas City to plant a church with a few other families from community.
I was really having a blast in Kansas City, planting churches and being with friends. But then, as God often does, he called us to the next season. We were able to come back to Chicago, and I now have this great privilege and honor to work with a great team of people to help plant churches all over the world so people can find their way back to God. That has taken me to Ecuador, to Africa.
Following Jesus has blown the roof off of everything that I thought life would be. I never dreamed that it would be what it is today.
It's just been an amazing journey, and I'm so glad that I said yes to that call that Jesus made on my life.
I'm going to ask the band to come on up, and let me ask you, all right, which cycle do you want to live in? We can stay on that all too familiar cycle of works, where we can achieve defined significance in hopes that somehow that'll sustain us, ultimately bring acceptance. But we all know, just like Patrick said, it only lasts as long as your last promotion, your most recent compliment, your most significant victory, and then you start it all over again. But here's the good news. Today, you can step out of the cycle of works and begin the cycle of grace. So the most important question you got to answer is this. And Patrick said it. Have you said yes to Jesus? Have you? Have you ever said yes to the one who wants to free you from your past, give you purpose for your present, give you hope for your future? I mean, if you've said yes to following him, you are forgiven. You are a child of God. And just like the cycle of grace shows us, it starts with acceptance. Not because of what I've done, but because of what Jesus has done. Brennan Manning, who wrote the Ragamuffin Gospel, was a former priest, recovering alcoholic, and he said, God loves us as we are, and not as we should be, because none of us are as we should be. Paul, one of the earliest followers of Jesus, wrote this, once you were dead because of your disobedience and your many sins, but God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, he gave us life when he raised Christ from the dead. God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things that we've done so that none of us can boast about it. In community, we encourage everyone who has experienced this acceptance to find sustenance in three practices, and they do. They sustain us in this grace. We celebrate God privately and publicly. We connect with Christ's followers for encouragement and support, and we contribute to the mission in significant ways as God uses our time, talent, and resources to achieve His purposes. And that is what it looks like to live a questionable life. And you can begin that life today. You can have a rebirth day when you experience God's amazing, amazing grace and acceptance simply because you were born. And where does it start? It starts in the heart. It starts right there. Will you say yes to Jesus even today? We're going to take communion together. And communion is a time where you can say yes to Jesus. See, what Jesus did is He knew that we would forget this. He knew that we would have to be reminded. He could see it coming. He could see us starting to reverse the cycle of grace. And He wanted there to be a reminder. He said, "Remember me," when He hung out with His small group. And He handed out bread and He said, "This is my body that is broken for you. I want you to eat it and remember me." When He took the cup, He said, "I want you to drink this. This is a symbol of my blood that will be shed for you. And I want you to remember me." So He also told us, every time that you gather together, I want you to do this. And so, snow or no snow, we have gathered together. And so we're going to celebrate who Jesus is through communion. And so you're invited to do that. And if this is the very first time that you've said yes to Jesus, I would love to talk with you about that after the service. But the ushers are here. They're going to pass the little cracker that's there, the little cup of juice. You can take those and eat them. And let's celebrate who Jesus is right now.